On March 11, 1987, an event occurred at Kyiv School No. 106 that shocked the entire Soviet Union. Within a few hours, 13 people, students and teachers, were rushed to the hospital with identical symptoms. By morning, 4 of them had died in agonizing torment. The ambulance doctors were at a loss. All the victims exhibited the same signs, as well as limb involvement, hair loss, vomiting, convulsions. Tests showed complete destruction of internal organs. This was not the first mass poisoning in the Ukrainian capital. Over the past few years, dozens of people had died under mysterious circumstances. Neighbors in communal apartments, relatives, acquaintances, random passers-by, they all crossed paths with one family. A family that turned murder into a craft and poison into a tool for enrichment. The story of Tamara Ivanyutina is the story of how an ordinary dishwasher became the most brutal serial poisoner in the history of the Soviet Union. It is a tale of a woman who showed no mercy to children, the elderly, or anyone who stood in her way to her coveted black Volga. On December 6, 1990, Tamara Ivanyutina became the last woman in the USSR to be sentenced to the supreme measure of punishment and executed by firing squad. But how did a quiet girl from a large family turn into a cold-blooded killer? How many victims were truly on her account, and why did she never repent until her last breath? March 11, 1987, Kyiv School No. 106. The morning began as usual. The duty class was setting the tables in the school cafeteria. The cooks were heating up breakfast, and the dishwasher Tamara Antonovna Ivanyutina, as always, arrived early. The 46-year-old woman was renowned for her diligence and hard work. She had been working at the school for 2 years and had proven herself in the best light. Quiet, unassuming, always ready to help. That's how her colleagues described her. The first lesson hadn't even ended when the math teacher felt ill in the staff room.
The woman complained of sudden dizziness, weakness in her legs, and severe nausea. She was taken to the medical office. 10 minutes later, 2 more students were brought there with the same symptoms. A boy from 5th grade and a girl from 7th. Half an hour later, the number of victims climbed into the dozens. The school nurse called an ambulance. The arriving doctors were bewildered. They had never seen anything like it. People writhed in pain. Their limbs grew cold and numb. A white foam appeared on their lips, followed by uncontrollable vomiting. The worst part? No one could figure out the cause. Tests revealed catastrophic destruction of the liver and kidneys, but what had triggered this devastation remained a mystery. By evening, 13 people from school number 106 were in the intensive care units of Kiev hospitals. 9 of them were in critically severe condition, according to the doctors. Children and adults raved in delirium, lost consciousness, and their bodies refused to function. The medics tried every treatment they knew: IV drips, stomach pumping, injections of various drugs. Nothing helped. That night, the first patient died. A 42-year-old PE teacher, a sturdy man. An hour later, a 9-year-old girl passed away. By morning on March 12, the list of victims had grown by 2 more: a first-grade schoolboy and a lab assistant from the chemistry room. The police were called immediately. Investigators arrived at the school and began inspecting the cafeteria. The initial suspicion fell on the food supplies, but everything was fresh. Expiration dates were in order, sanitary conditions were compliant, the cooks underwent regular medical checkups. The theory of mass food poisoning fell apart. Then attention turned to a strange detail. All the victims that day had either eaten breakfast in the school cafeteria, drunk tea in the staff room, or snacked on sandwiches taken from the storage area. But the products were checked and found to be clean.
So what connected the victims? The answer came unexpectedly. One of the investigators recalled similar incidents that had occurred at the same school 6 months earlier. Back then, a dietitian named Kukurenko had been hospitalized. She died, and the doctors diagnosed acute heart failure. The woman was only 43 years old, and she had been perfectly healthy the day before. The investigator pulled up the archives. It turned out that over the past year in this Kyiv district, there had been a whole series of sudden deaths. People died with similar symptoms: limb involvement, heart problems, organ failure. All of them were somehow connected to school number 106 or lived in neighboring buildings. They began questioning the entire cafeteria staff: cooks, cleaners, the supply manager. Everyone gave statements, trying to recall anything unusual. And then the name of dietitian Kukurenko surfaced. It turned out that before her death, she had clashed with the dishwasher Ivanyutina. Kukurenko had noticed products disappearing from the cafeteria and was planning to write a report. A week after that conversation, the dietitian died. The investigators decided to exhume the body of Natalia Kukurenko. What the forensic medical examination uncovered horrified even seasoned experts. The deceased's tissues contained a massive dose of thallium, one of the most dangerous poisons, causing agonizing death. The lethal dose of this substance is minuscule, and poisoning symptoms are often mistaken for cardiac or infectious diseases. Thallium, Clerici's solution, a liquid used by geologists to determine mineral density, a substance to which an ordinary person in the Soviet Union had no access. Where had it come from in the body of the school dietitian? On March 15th, a search team descended on Tamara Ivanyutina's apartment. What they found there exceeded all expectations. Tamara Maslenko was born in 1941 in the city of Tula. Her birth coincided with the start of the Great Patriotic War.
Her father went off to the front when the girl was not even a month old. Her mother was left alone with 6 children in a tiny room in a communal apartment. Hunger, cold, devastation. That's how Tamara remembered her childhood. Her father returned from the war in 1945. Anton Petrovich Maslenko was a stern and demanding man. The front hadn't broken him, but it had made him even harsher. Strict rules were established in the home. The children were raised with discipline. But the main thing was something else. The father constantly repeated the same thought. In life, the main thing is prosperity. Without money, a person isn't a person. They're nobody. That phrase burrowed deep into little Tamara's mind. She saw how her mother remade one dress for 3 daughters, how the family subsisted on potatoes alone for weeks, how the communal apartment neighbors looked at them with contempt, whispering poverty. The girl swore to herself that when she grew up, she would have everything, and so much money that the neighbors would envy her. Maria Ivanovna, Tamara's mother, fully shared her husband's views. The woman was cunning and resourceful, able to wriggle out of any situation. In the post-war years, when famine gripped the country, she learned to procure scarce products and resell them at triple the price. The police drew up protocols for speculation several times, but the cases never made it to court. Maria Ivanovna knew how to negotiate. The children absorbed this philosophy with their mother's milk. The 6 Maslenko children grew up close-knit but odd. Neighbors noted that the family kept to themselves, not letting outsiders into their room, living some kind of closed-off life of their own. The kids didn't play with other children in the yard or bring friends home. The family is like some kind of sect, the communal apartment residents whispered behind their backs. In 1958, the Maslenkos moved to Kyiv.
Anton Petrovich got a job at a factory, and the family was allocated a room in a communal apartment on Podil. 22 square meters for 8 people. It was a slight improvement over life in Tula, but the room remained cramped and stuffy. Tamara was entering her 17th year. The girl had grown up, quiet, unassuming, grey. She wasn't distinguished by beauty, a gaunt face, colourless hair, dull eyes. But the main thing was that there was no warmth in those eyes. Neighbours, recalling young Tamara, said she looked at people like obstacles, coldly, appraisingly, without emotion. The new communal apartment became a proving ground for the Maslenko family. The same problems were there: a shared kitchen, shared toilet, shared hallway, and the same eternal conflicts. Who cooks first in the morning? Who uses how much electricity? Who blasts the radio too loud? ordinary household squabbles that happened in millions of Soviet communal apartments. But the Maslenkos didn't like conflicts. They preferred to solve problems their own way, silently, effectively, permanently. Neighbors began disappearing in strange ways. At first, it raised no suspicions. People got sick, died. That's life. The first to go was the neighbor Uncle Vanya, who loved cranking up the TV at night. Maria Maslenko asked him several times to turn down the volume, but the man just snapped back. "I don't care. I do what I want in my own room." A week after their latest spat, Uncle Vanya was rushed to the hospital with acute abdominal pain. The doctors diagnosed heart failure. The man died on the third day. He was 52. Then the neighbor Aunt Klava passed away, the one who argued over dirt in the shared toilet. The woman complained to Maria Ivanovna that the Maslenkos didn't clean up after themselves. The next day, Aunt Klava ate a pie, a peace offering from the reconciled neighbor. That evening, she fell ill. In the morning, Aunt Klava was found dead in her room. The ambulance doctor pronounced it a stroke.
The third victim was a distant relative of Anton Petrovich. The man had come from the village to visit the Maslenkos, but during the feast, he voiced his disapproval of their lifestyle. "You," he said, "live ungodly. All you care about is money and profit. You've forgotten about the soul." Anton Petrovich said nothing, just narrowed his eyes. The guest stayed overnight. In the morning, he was awakened by excruciating pains. The ambulance rushed the man to the hospital, where he suffered for 3 days and died in terrible convulsions. The doctors threw up their hands, either an infection or poisoning from spoiled food. Young Tamara observed all of this. She saw how her parents turned unwanted people into corpses. She saw how simply it was done. Treat them, serve it up, offer it. And how easy it was afterward to call the doctor, cry at the funeral, accept condolences. For the 19-year-old girl, this became a revelation. It turned out that people could be removed from one's path, and no one would suspect a thing. But where did a simple working-class family get the poison from? How did Maria and Anton Maslenko obtain thallium, a substance to which only narrow specialists had access in the Soviet Union? The answer came later, during the investigation. Anton Petrovich worked at a geological enterprise where Clerici's solution was used, an aqueous solution of thallium salts and other heavy metals. This substance was employed to separate minerals by density. There was strict accounting of chemicals at the production site, but Maslenko was an experienced worker who enjoyed the trust of management. For years, he smuggled out tiny amounts of the solution, a few milliliters at a time in small vials. Over 10 years, he amassed a whole collection. Thallium is an insidious poison. It has no taste or smell, dissolves easily in water and food. The lethal dose is just 1 gram. Poisoning symptoms don't appear immediately, but after several hours or even days.
The person feels weakness, nausea, abdominal pain. Doctors often mistake it for ordinary food poisoning or a heart attack. Then, hair loss begins, numbness in the limbs, destruction of internal organs. Death comes in torment, and even experienced toxicologists can't always pinpoint the cause. The Maslenko family turned thallium into a family heirloom. The poison was stored in a special jar, hidden in the farthest corner of the cupboard. The children knew of its existence and understood that it was a terrible secret that couldn't be revealed to anyone. Maria Ivanovna sometimes pulled out the jar and showed it to the children. "See, this is our protection. With this, we fear no one. If someone offends us, we know what to do." Tamara absorbed this philosophy completely. For her, the poison became not just a means of self-defense, but a tool for achieving goals. A tool that opened any doors and removed any obstacles. In 1962, Tamara got married. Her chosen one was Oleg Ivanyutin, a simple worker at a neighboring factory. The man was quiet, spineless, completely submissive to his wife. The wedding was modest. The Maslenkos didn't like lavish celebrations, preferring to save money. The young family settled in the same communal apartment,
in Tamara's parents' room. The cramped conditions intensified, but no one minded. Tamara gave birth to a son, then a daughter. The children grew up in the same atmosphere as their mother, the cult of money, contempt for weak people, and a conviction of their own exceptionalism. Ivanyutina worked variously as a saleswoman, cashier, or storekeeper, and stole everywhere. Small amounts, unnoticeable shortages, clever manipulations with documents. She was cautious, but not cautious enough to avoid punishment. In 1975, Tamara was convicted of speculation and petty embezzlement. The court gave her a suspended sentence with probation. It was her first conviction, but Ivanyutina drew no lessons from it.
On the contrary, she became even more cunning in her schemes. Meanwhile, in the communal apartment, the Maslenkos continued solving problems. Exactly how many people died over those years is unknown. The investigation later established 9 proven murders, but many believe there were far more victims. Neighbors disappeared one after another, and no one suspected a connection between these deaths and the quiet family in the far room. How did an ordinary Soviet family turn into an organized crime group? What compelled the parents to involve their own children in murder? And most importantly, when did Tamara Ivanyutina cross the line and start killing not for protection, but for profit and pleasure? Answers to these questions would only emerge in the mid-1980s, when Ivanyutina's appetites grew so large that her crimes could no longer be hidden. The 1970s became a time of honing techniques for the Maslenko family. Poison evolved from a tool of self-defense into a refined mechanism for solving any problems. And problems were anything that hindered money accumulation or caused even the slightest discomfort. By the mid-1970s, the Podil communal apartment had emptied by half. Of the 12 families living there at the start of the 1960s, only 5 remained. The rest had either died or moved away. And curiously, those who died were mostly the ones who had clashed with the Maslenkos. But the police saw nothing suspicious in it. People got sick, aged, passed away. That's life. By then, Anton Petrovich and Maria Ivanovna had crossed the 60-year mark, but they remained active and energetic. They continued to run the family like a mafia clan, making decisions, assigning roles, controlling execution. The children obeyed without question. Tamara became her mother's right hand, her executor and apprentice. One incident particularly vividly demonstrates the cynicism of this family. In 1976, a distant relative from the village came to visit the Maslenkos.
The woman was ill with tuberculosis and hoped her city relatives would help her get to good doctors. Anton Petrovich and Maria Ivanovna welcomed the guest, fed her, put her to bed, and that night held a family council. "She's sick," Maria Ivanovna said. "She'll infect us all. And besides, why do we need another mouth to feed? Food costs money." The children were silent. Tamara nodded. "Yes, Mum, you're right." Anton Petrovich pulled out the jar of poison. In the morning, the relative was awakened by excruciating abdominal pain. The woman writhed, screamed, and begged them to call an ambulance. The Maslenkos didn't rush. They waited until the guest had weakened so much that she could no longer speak. Only then did they summon the doctors. The arriving team diagnosed acute poisoning by an unknown substance. The patient was taken to intensive care, where she suffered for 3 days and died. The Maslenkos attended the funeral as a family. They cried, wailed, and swore they had no idea what had happened. The villagers pitied the city relatives, saying how unlucky they were. Their guest had died on them. This episode showed Tamara that her parents would stop at nothing. Poison had become a familiar tool for them, no more frightening than a hammer or an axe. Murdering a person had turned into a routine procedure, something one could calmly discuss over tea. But the most terrifying part was that the Maslenko children perceived it as normal.
Tamara and her younger sister Nina, observing their parents' actions, felt neither horror nor disgust. For them, it was just part of the family routine, like Saturday cleaning or Sunday dinner. 1979 brought a new challenge. Tamara's father-in-law, Oleg's father, died. The old man wasn't wealthy, but he had saved up a little. A modest sum of money, gold watches, an antique ring. All of it was supposed to go to his second wife and son, Oleg. But Tamara thought it was too little.
At the wake, the elderly widow, Oleg's mother, suddenly complained of heart pains. The woman turned pale, clutched her chest, and began gasping for air. Tamara instantly jumped up with a shot glass. "Here, Mom, Valocordon, drink it quickly." The mother-in-law obediently drank and immediately began vomiting. The woman screamed, "She's poisoned me! She's poisoned me!" Panic erupted in the room. The guests buzzed. "Someone call an ambulance!" One of the women present shouted that she had seen Tamara add something from a vial to the glass. Furious relatives surrounded Ivanyutina. They demanded she immediately show what she had poured in. Tamara didn't lose her composure. She feigned righteous indignation, shouting about slander and injustice. "How dare you?" Her voice trembled with outrage. "I was trying to help, and you're accusing me of something?" With those words, she swung and smashed the shot glass on the floor. The glass shattered into tiny shards. The liquid spilled across the linoleum. The evidence was destroyed. Without physical proof, it was impossible to accuse Tamara. Meanwhile, the mother-in-law began to feel better. She had drunk only a little, and the poison dose proved insufficient for death. The woman lived several more years, but remained forever convinced that her daughter-in-law had tried to poison her. Of course, she couldn't prove it. This incident taught Ivanyutina caution. She realized she needed to act more cunningly, eliminating witnesses. The poison should be administered discreetly when no one was around. And one must always have an alibi. Tamara's younger sister, Nina Maslenko, by the early 1980s had also actively joined the family business. Nina married a man named Matsibora, but the change in surname didn't alter her essence. She remained a Maslenko, cold, calculating, greedy. The sisters were close. They went shopping together, discussed purchases, shared plans. And those plans often revolved around how to eliminate yet another person standing in the way of their enrichment. For Tamara and Nina, murder had become something like a hobby. They discussed methods, shared experiences, advised each other on the best ways to act. In 1982, another incident occurred. A neighbor dropped by the Maslenko's place. She owed Maria Ivanovna a small sum, 50 rubles. The woman apologized, saying she'd pay back the debt in a month when she got her salary. Maria Ivanovna smiled and said it was no big deal, no need to rush. But after the neighbor left, she told her daughters she won't pay back a thing. "I saw how she looked. She plans to stiff us." Tamara thought for a moment. Her apartment's nice, 3 rooms. If she dies, the heirs will sell it. We could buy it cheap. The plan formed in an instant. A week later, they invited the neighbor over for tea. Maria Ivanovna baked pies. Tamara brewed fragrant tea. The women chatted amiably about life, children, the weather, and in the guest's cup, death was dissolving. 2 days later, the neighbor died in the hospital. The doctors diagnosed a massive heart attack. The heirs, distant relatives living in another city, did indeed sell the apartment. The Maslenkos learned about the sale through acquaintances and offered their price. The deal went through quickly. Tamara got the chance to expand her living space. Now her family had 2 rooms instead of 1.
This murder opened up new possibilities for Ivanyutina. It turned out that with poison, one could not only get rid of enemies, but also make money. Apartments, inheritances, valuables, all of it could be obtained by timely removing the right person. The idea captivated Tamara completely. In 1983, she started working as a saleswoman at a Kyiv market. It was a lucrative position. She could steal products, shortchange customers, take bribes for scarce goods. Tamara threw herself into it with enthusiasm. Money flowed like a river. The piggy bank grew.
But even here, there were those who got in the way. The market manager, a strict woman of pre-retirement age, once caught Tamara stealing. She threatened dismissal and a report to the police. Ivanyutina was frightened. She already had a conviction. A second sentence would mean real prison time. The manager died 3 days later. The official cause, rupture of a cerebral aneurysm. Death came suddenly, at work. The woman arrived at the office in the morning, drank coffee that Tamara had brought her, and an hour later was rushed to the hospital, unconscious. By evening, she was gone. There was no investigation. The doctors deemed the death natural. The deceased did indeed have vascular problems. She was under a neurologist's care. Tamara kept her job at the market, but 6 months later, she was fired anyway. The new manager proved more vigilant. Losing the job infuriated Ivanyutina. She considered herself an indispensable specialist and couldn't forgive the management for the decision. A plan for revenge formed in her head, but she couldn't carry it out. The new manager was cautious, refusing any treats from former employees and keeping her distance in general. Left without a steady income, Tamara scraped by with odd jobs. She washed stairwells, cleaned apartments, worked as a nanny. The pay was meager and it infuriated her. Ivanyutina was accustomed to good earnings and had no desire to sink to that level. But her main dream remained out of reach. Tamara wanted to buy a Volga, a black, shiny one with chrome details. Such cars were symbols of success, markers of high status. Owning a Volga in the mid-1980s meant belonging to the elite, and Tamara desperately craved that belonging. But a Volga cost a fortune, about 10,000 rubles. With an average salary of 150 rubles, it was a fantastical sum. She'd have to save for decades, and Ivanyutina had no intention of waiting. In 1985, Tamara turned 44. Time was slipping away, youth fading. The coveted Volga stayed an unattainable dream. Ivanyutina seethed with anger, envied those who had cars, hated the whole world for her poverty. And then she took a desperate step. Tamara got a job as a dishwasher at school number 106. The salary was pitiful, just 70 rubles a month. But something else interested her. The school offered plenty of theft opportunities. Food from the cafeteria, inventory, office supplies. All of it could be smuggled out and sold. And most importantly, the school employed people who had money. Things. Valuables. Tamara got the job using a forged work record book. Her conviction for speculation should have barred her from working in a children's institution, but Ivanyutina found an acquaintance who, for a small bribe, fabricated a fake document. It contained no mention of the conviction, only commendations and awards from previous jobs. The school principal, reviewing the papers, found nothing suspicious. Tamara appeared as a respectable, middle-aged woman. Quiet, diligent, willing to work for little pay. Such employees were always in short supply. Ivanyutina was hired without issue. Happy days began for Tamara. She washed dishes in the school cafeteria, had access to all the storage rooms, knew where the food was kept, and started stealing. At first, just a little. A chunk of butter, a can of stewed meat,
a bag of sugar. Then bolder. Whole boxes of products, sacks of flour, crates of eggs. Dietitian Natalia Kukurenko quickly noticed the shortages. The woman was an experienced worker who knew her cafeteria inside out. She sorted checks, compared invoices with actual stock, and traced it back to Ivanyutina. Kukurenko called Tamara in for a talk. She didn't go straight to the principal, deciding to give the dishwasher a chance. "Tamara Antonovna," the dietitian said, "I know you're stealing food. Return what you've taken and I won't make a fuss."
But if you continue, I'll write a report. Ivanyutina nodded, apologized, promised to mend her ways. But she had no intention of reforming. On the contrary, a murder plan ripened in her head. Kukurenko stood in the way of easy money, so she had to be eliminated. Tamara brought a small vial of thallium solution from home and waited for the right moment. It came a week later. Kukurenko left her teacup on the table in the storage room. She stepped away for a minute, needed to dash to the pantry urgently. Tamara instantly poured a few drops of poison into the cup. It took seconds. The dietitian returned, finished her tea, and went back to work. That evening, she felt ill. That night, Kukurenko was hospitalized. The doctors diagnosed acute heart failure. The woman died on the third day, never regaining consciousness. At the funeral, Tamara cried along with everyone else. She wailed about what a wonderful woman Natalia Mikhailovna had been, how tragic it was to lose her. Colleagues comforted Ivanyutina, unaware that a killer stood before them. After Kukurenko's death, control over the cafeteria slackened. A new dietitian hadn't been appointed yet. The supply manager was busy with other matters. Tamara gained complete freedom of action. She stole without restraint now. Whole boxes, sacks, crates. She sold the food at the market through acquaintances. Money piled up, but it wasn't enough. Ivanyutina wanted more. And so she began studying the teachers. Who among them was wealthy? Who had valuables? Who could be robbed? The school party organizer, a woman in her 50s, had gold jewelry and a nice collection of antique items. Tamara learned about it by chance. She had stopped by the party organizer's home on school business once and spotted a sideboard with porcelain figurines. Ivanyutina's eyes lit up. There were the riches. She just needed to play it right.
She started befriending the party organizer, bringing her apples from home, treating her to homemade baked goods, sharing stories of her hard life. The party organizer warmed to the poor dishwasher with sympathy, while Tamara bided her time. In the fall of 1986, the party organizer caught the flu. She missed several days of work. Tamara visited her at home, bringing chicken broth. "Here, Valentina Stepanovna, have some hot broth. It'll make you feel better." The party organizer was touched by the care. The broth was poisoned. The woman died 2 days later. The doctors ruled it complications from the flu. Her heart couldn't take it. The party organizer's relatives didn't suspect foul play. Tamara attended the funeral, cried, and said, "What a tragedy." And a week later, as the relatives sorted through the deceased's belongings, several valuables went missing. A gold ring, a bracelet, 2 figurines. The loss wasn't noticed right away. In the chaos of the funeral and inheritance matters, no one inventoried every item. By the time they realized, it was too late, and Ivanyutina had already sold the loot. But even so, it wasn't enough for the Volga. Tamara tallied her savings, about 3,000 rubles. It was a substantial sum, but still far from the coveted 10,000. Ivanyutina fumed. Time was passing, opportunities dwindling. She needed to come up with something. And she did. In early 1987, Tamara decided on a mass poisoning. The plan was simple and monstrous at the same time.
She would poison many people all at once. Teachers who kept valuables at home, and children from wealthy families whose parents would pay any sum to find out who was responsible. Ivanyutina was banking on chaos, the commotion of a mass poisoning, she thought. No one would notice the disappearance of items from the apartments of the deceased. And the money that could be earned by trading information would finally allow her to buy the Volga. The plan was insane, but Tamara could no longer stop.
The thirst for money, envy, hatred of those around her, it all mixed into a poisonous cocktail that poisoned her mind far more than thallium poisoned the bodies of her victims. On March 11, 1987, Tamara Ivanyutina arrived at work with firm resolve. Today, she would execute her plan. Today, Minnie would die, and she would become rich. Thallium was discovered in 1861. English chemist William Crookes identified the new element while studying residues of sulfuric acid. The metal was named after the Greek word thallos, meaning green branch, because it produced a green line in the spectrum. Scientists quickly realized they had uncovered one of the most dangerous poisons on the planet. Thallium and its compounds have insidious properties. They are colorless, tasteless, and odorless. They dissolve completely in water, are stable when heated. One can add them to soup or tea, and the poison won't break down. The lethal dose for an adult is from 0.5 gram to 1 gram. For a child, 300 milligrams is enough. But the most terrifying aspect is the mechanism of action. Thallium integrates into the body's cells in place of potassium. These two elements are chemically similar, and the cell can't distinguish them. Thallium ions penetrate all barriers into the blood, the brain, the nerves, the liver, the kidneys, and begin destroying the body from within. The first symptoms appear after several hours, sometimes a day. The person feels weakness, nausea, abdominal pain. Doctors usually suspect food poisoning or stomach flu, start treatment with activated charcoal and IV drips, but it doesn't help. After a day or two, the second stage sets in: damage to the nervous system. The hands and feet go numb. A sensation of crawling ants appears, followed by burning pain. The patient can't stand, walk, or hold a spoon. Vision blurs. Hallucinations begin. On the third or fourth day, hair falls out. First from the head, then eyebrows, lashes, everything else. The person goes completely bald in a few hours.
This is a unique symptom that should alert doctors. But in the Soviet Union of the 1980s, only a handful of specialists knew about thallium poisoning. Ordinary doctors didn't even consider it. Meanwhile, internal organs are destroyed in parallel. The liver and kidneys stop functioning, toxins build up in the blood, brain swelling begins. The person falls into a coma and dies in convulsions. Death is agonizing, slow, horrific. An antidote exists, Prussian blue, a special drug that binds thallium and removes it from the body. But the diagnosis must be known. Recognizing thallium poisoning is extremely difficult. The symptoms resemble dozens of other illnesses. In the USSR, thallium was used in industry. Geologists employed Clerici's solution, an aqueous mixture of thallium formate and thallium malonate. This solution had an extremely high density, nearly 5 times heavier than water. If stones were dropped into Clerici's liquid, the light ones would float and the heavy ones would sink. This allowed minerals to be separated by density. Clerici's liquid was highly toxic. Strict safety rules were in place at production sites. It could only be handled with gloves and a respirator. The premises were equipped with powerful ventilation. Every drop of the substance was accounted for. Violations of safety protocols led to dismissal. But Anton Petrovich Maslenko had worked at the facility for over 20 years. He was an experienced, trusted employee. They relied on him, and he exploited that. For decades, Maslenko smuggled Clerici's liquid out of the factory, a few milliliters at a time, in small vials hidden in the pockets of his work overalls.
There was accounting, but it wasn't flawless. A few milliliters per month got lost in measurement errors. Over 10 years, Maslenko accumulated about a liter of the solution. That would have been enough to poison 1,000 people. The family stored the poison in a heavy glass jar with a ground glass stopper.
The jar was hidden in the cupboard behind old clothes. The children knew of its existence and were afraid to touch it. Maria Ivanovna used the poison in measured doses. She understood the supply wasn't infinite and treated the substance with care. To kill an adult, she used 5 to 10 milliliters of the solution. This delivered about half a gram of thallium, enough for death, but not too much to arouse doctors' suspicions of poisoning. Ivanyutina learned from her mother. She memorized the dosages, methods of application, and precautions. Maria Ivanovna taught her daughter, "The main thing is not to overdo it. If you give too much, the person dies right away, and the doctors will realize it's poison. You need to give it little by little, so the death looks natural." Tamara took the lesson to heart. When she started killing on her own, she acted cautiously. A few drops in tea or soup, and the next day the person was in the hospital, 3 days later in the morgue. Doctors diagnosed heart attacks, strokes, kidney failure. No one thought of poison. But in 1987, Ivanyutina broke all the rules of caution. She decided on a mass poisoning. And that required large doses of the poison. Tamara took nearly half of the remaining stock from home, about 200 milliliters of the solution. It was an enormous amount, capable of killing 40 people. On March 11th, arriving at work, Ivanyutina hid the vial of poison in the pocket of her robe. She waited for a moment when the cafeteria would be empty. That moment came around 8 a.m. The cooks had stepped out for a 5-minute smoke break. The cafeteria manager was delayed in the principal's office. Tamara acted quickly and coldly. She opened the refrigerator, pulled out a large pot of ground meat for cutlets. This was the preparation for the school lunches. Cutlets were to be made from the meat for several classes. Ivanyutina poured the entire vial of poison into the ground meat, stirred it with a spoon, and put the pot back. The procedure took less than a minute. When the cooks returned, Tamara went on washing dishes as if nothing had happened. No one noticed a thing. By lunchtime, cutlets were made from the poisoned meat. They were served to several classes, 1st, 5th, 7th. A few cutlets went to the teachers, who ate in the same cafeteria. In total, about 40 people ate the tainted food. 2 hours later, the nightmare began. The first to complain of feeling unwell were the children from 1st grade. 7-year-olds writhed in abdominal pain. They vomited right in the classroom. The teacher called the nurse. While she was rushing over, 5 more children fell ill. By 3 p.m., more than 20 people had crammed into the medical office. The school nurse realized she couldn't handle it and called an ambulance. Several crews arrived at once. The doctors stared in bewilderment at the crowd of writhing, pained children and adults. The most severe cases were rushed to the hospital first. These were 4: 2 first graders, the PE teacher, and the lab assistant. All of them had eaten 2 cutlets each and received lethal doses of thallium. The others had 1 cutlet, or even half, so they were poisoned too, but the dose wasn't enough for quick death. In intensive care, doctors tried to save the dying. Stomach pumping, IV drips, antidotes for known poisons. Nothing worked. Blood tests showed catastrophe. The liver and kidneys were disintegrating before their eyes. But what had caused this destruction, the doctors couldn't understand. That night, the deaths began. The PE teacher went first. His heart stopped around midnight. The doctors tried to resuscitate him for over an hour, but to no avail. At 2 a.m., a 9-year-old girl from 5th grade died. She suffered in convulsions, screamed, called for her mom. Her death shook even the battle-hardened intensivists. By morning, 2 more had died, a 7-year-old boy and the 43-year-old lab assistant. The other victims teetered on the edge of life and death. Many began losing hair, and that's when an experienced toxicologist consulting on the case guessed it. Thallium, he said. Tests were rushed. The lab confirmed massive thallium salt poisoning. Specific treatment began. Prussian blue, forced diuresis,
hemodialysis. 9 were saved, but 4 died, and the survivors were left disabled for life. The police launched an investigation. The theory of accidental poisoning was dismissed immediately. Thallium couldn't have gotten into the school food by chance. This was a terrorist act, or deliberate murder. But who? And why? The investigators combed the school inch by inch, questioned every employee, checked every room, reviewed all documents. Theories ranged from revenge by a fired worker to sabotage by foreign intelligence. But the truth turned out to be much simpler and far more horrifying. The first lead came from the death of dietitian Kukurenko. The investigator pulled up the medical records and was astonished. A healthy 43-year-old woman dies in 3 days from heart failure. The symptoms were similar to those observed in the current victims. They decided to exhume the body. On March 16th, Natalia Kukurenko's remains were exhumed from the grave. Forensic experts took tissue samples and sent them to the lab. The results came back 2 days later. The thallium content in the deceased liver exceeded the norm by 300 times. Kukurenko had been poisoned with the same substance as the current victims. They began reconstructing the dietitian's final days. Colleagues recounted the conflict with the dishwasher Ivanyutina over missing products. They recalled that Kukurenko had planned to write a report, but suddenly fell ill and died. Suspicion fell on Tamara. The investigators pulled up Ivanyutina's personnel file and immediately spotted oddities. Her work record book looked brand new, despite the woman being 46 years old. The entries for previous jobs were uniform, as if written by the same hand. They decided to verify it.
It turned out the work record was fake. Ivanyutina's real one was in the archives of one of the enterprises where she had worked before her conviction. It contained a record of her 1975 conviction for speculation. With such a record, Tamara would never have been hired at a school. This was no coincidence. A woman with a conviction forges documents, gets a job at the school, starts stealing, clashes with the dietitian who then dies of poisoning, and 6 months later, a mass poisoning occurs. All the threads led to one person. On March 15, 4 days after the tragedy, the investigative team arrived at the address, Podilska Street, Building 13, Apartment 8. This was where Tamara Ivanyutina lived with her family. The apartment was a typical 3-room Khrushchev-era flat. Nothing remarkable: old furniture, worn carpets, faded wallpaper. Tamara greeted the investigators calmly, even courteously. Come in, what can I help with?" She was confident that nothing linked her to the school tragedy. The search began at 9 a.m. They checked every closet, every nightstand, every box. Tamara sat on the sofa and watched the police work impassively. Her husband Oleg was nervous, pacing from corner to corner. The children stayed silent. At 11, in the far corner of a cupboard, they found a heavy glass jar with a ground glass stopper. Inside sloshed a clear liquid that looked like water. The investigator pulled out the jar and turned it in the light. "What is this?" Tamara blinked. "Water. Pure drinking water." "Why in such a strange container?" "It keeps better that way. An old method." The investigator sniffed the contents. No smell. He touched it with his finger. Heavy, oily, not like water. The jar was seized and sent for analysis. The results came back in 3 hours. Clerici's liquid, an aqueous solution of thallium formate and thallium malonate. Concentration, about 20%. The jar held roughly 400 milliliters, enough for 80 murders. Ivanyutina was arrested on the spot. She didn't resist, didn't scream, didn't cry, just asked, "And when will you let me go? I have to get to work." The investigator looked at her in astonishment. The woman had just killed 4 people and crippled 9 others, yet she was concerned about her job. That same day, Tamara's parents, Anton Petrovich and Maria Ivanovna Maslenko, were arrested. The elderly couple was 79 and 77 years old respectively, but they appeared sturdy and vigorous.
Anton Petrovich greeted the police with curses. Maria Ivanovna burst into tears and wailed about the injustice. During the search of the Maslenkos' apartment, they found a notebook. In it, Maria Ivanovna had meticulously recorded all of the family's operations over the past 20 years: victims' names, dates, poison doses, reasons for the murders. Everything neatly itemized. The investigators couldn't believe their eyes. Before them was a complete chronicle of crimes by serial killers. The entries shocked even the seasoned detectives. It turned out that the Maslenko family had been killing systematically since 1962. 25 years of methodical extermination of people. Victims included neighbors, acquaintances, relatives, colleagues. The reasons varied: revenge for slights, desire to seize property, elimination of witnesses, or just plain malice. The Maslenko's younger daughter, Nina Matsibora, was arrested the next day. The 38-year-old woman worked as a cashier in a store. During the search of her apartment, they found another vial of thallium and a list of people marked with done and remaining. Nina proved to be no less active a participant in the criminal group than her older sister. Interrogations began immediately. The investigators hoped that one of the arrested would crack, start giving testimony, try to shift the blame onto the others. But the Maslenkos turned out to be a tough nut to crack. Anton Petrovich refused to speak altogether.
He sat through the interrogations with a stone face and answered every question with one word: I don't know. Maria Ivanovna cried, swore she understood nothing, that the notebook wasn't hers, that someone had planted the poison. Nina stayed silent and stared at the floor. Only Tamara opened up, but not in the way the investigators expected. She didn't repent, didn't beg for forgiveness, didn't try to justify herself. On the contrary, Ivanyutina spoke calmly, even with pride. She described how she planned the murders, selected victims, added the poison to food. "Do you realize you've killed 4 people, 2 of them children?" the investigator asked. Tamara shrugged. "So what? They were in my way." "How could children be in your way?" "They asked me for cutlets for their dog. I refused, and they complained to the manager. Because of them, I almost got fired." The investigator felt a chill. The woman had killed 2 schoolboys just because they asked for food scraps for a dog. And she spoke of it as if it were a trifle. "And the dietitian, Kukurenko, why did you kill her?" "She was getting in the way of my stealing food. Threatened to write a report." "And the school party organizer?" "She had gold and expensive figurines. I took them after she died." "Do you even realize what you've done?" the investigator was almost shouting. Tamara looked at him with calm, empty eyes. "I do. I was saving up for a car, a Volga, black with chrome bumpers. This was my dream." In her cell, Ivanyutina behaved strangely. She didn't pray, cry, or bang her head against the wall like many inmates do. On the contrary, Tamara was businesslike and active. She befriended the guards, treated them to candies that her husband brought, and took an interest in their lives. Her cellmates recounted that Ivanyutina loved giving advice. "You shouldn't quarrel with people," she would say. "It's harmful. And if someone gets in your way, invite them over, treat them to something tasty, slip in some poison." And the problem solved. The women listened in horror. They realized they were dealing with a psychopath. The investigation lasted 4 months. In that time, 9 proven murders and 20 attempted murders were established. But everyone understood that the real number of victims was much higher. Many murders couldn't be proven. Bodies had long been buried. Documents lost. Witnesses gone. The psychiatric evaluation deemed all 4 defendants sane. The psychiatrist noted signs of moral depravity and emotional coldness in Tamara, but that wasn't grounds for declaring her insane. Ivanyutina understood what she was doing and could control her actions. Therefore, she had to bear full responsibility. By the summer of 1987, the investigation was complete. The case went to court. All of Kyiv awaited the trial.
Newspapers wrote about the poisoner family. Radio broadcasts detailed the crimes. People were shocked and outraged. Many demanded the death penalty for all 4 defendants. The trial began on June 23, 1987, in the Kyiv City Court. The session was held in the largest hall. A surge of public interest was expected, and it proved justified. From early morning, a crowd of several hundred gathered outside the courthouse. Everyone wanted to see the poisoners with their own eyes. Only 100 people were let into the hall. That was the seating capacity. The rest stayed outside, discussing the case details. The relatives of the deceased stood in a separate group. They held hands, cried, supported each other. Many carried photographs of their loved ones. At 9 a.m., the defendants were led into the hall. First came Anton Petrovich Maslenko. The 79-year-old man walked straight, staring ahead with an unseeing gaze. Behind him, Maria Ivanovna, a small hunched old woman with a headscarf. She sniffled and wiped her eyes. Then Nina Matsabora, pale, with her head down. And finally, Tamara Ivanyutina. Tamara walked calmly, even with dignity.
She was dressed in a dark dress, her hair neatly combed, and Ivanyutina looked at the public without fear, almost with curiosity. When her gaze met the relatives of the deceased, she didn't look away. This sparked an explosion of indignation in the hall. "Murderer!" a woman's voice screamed. "And beast!" a man's voice chimed in. The judge banged the gavel, calling for order. The guards tightened security. The mood in the hall was charged. The indictment was read for 2 hours. The prosecutor listed the crimes one by one. The murder of dietitian Kukarenko, the murder of the school party organizer, the attempted murder of 2 schoolboys who asked for cutlets for their dog, the mass poisoning on March 11th, which claimed 4 lives, the murders of communal apartment neighbors, the poisoning of relatives. The list seemed endless. When the prosecutor finished, a heavy silence fell over the hall. The numbers were monstrous. 9 proven murders, 20 attempted murders, 29 victims, many of whom were left disabled. And all of it for money, out of revenge for petty slights. Just like that. The judge asked the defendants if they admitted their guilt. Anton Petrovich remained silent. Maria Ivanovna sniffled. "I didn't do anything. It's all a mistake." Nina whispered, "I partially admit it." Tamara stated clearly, "I do not admit it." The questioning began. The prosecutor posed questions. The defendants answered. But the real shock came from Tamara Ivanyutina's testimony. She spoke of her crimes calmly, in detail, without emotion. She described how she selected victims, how she slipped in the poison, how she watched them die. "Tell me, did you feel any pity for your victims?" the prosecutor asked. "No," Tamara replied simply. "Not for the children either." "Not for the children either? Why? Why should I? They were in my way." The hall erupted. People jumped from their seats, shouted, demanded immediate execution. The mother of one of the deceased children tried to break through to the defendants, but the guards held her back. The judge called a recess to let everyone calm down. During the break, the victims' relatives gave interviews to journalists. "She's not human," the mother of the dead girl said. "She's a monster. She has no soul. She must die for what she did." The father of the murdered boy added, "I don't believe in the death penalty, but for her, I'll make an exception. She doesn't deserve to live." After the recess, the witness questioning began. Testimonies came from surviving victims, work colleagues, neighbors, doctors. The picture of the crimes grew fuller and more horrifying. The children's accounts from the survivors of the March 11th poisoning were especially devastating. A 10-year-old boy described how he ate the cutlets in the school cafeteria, how the pain started afterward, how he was taken to the hospital. "I thought I was going to die," the child said. "I was so scared. I called for my mom, but she wasn't there." An 8-year-old girl recounted the hair loss.
In the morning, I woke up and my hair was gone. It was all on the pillow. I got scared and started crying. Mom cried too. Now, 4 months after the poisoning, the girl's hair had started growing back, but the psychological trauma lingered. The child was afraid to eat in cafeterias, distrusted adults, and suffered nightmares. Witnesses and doctors described the agonies of the dying. It was a terrible death, the intensivist said. The person dies fully conscious, aware of what's happening to them. The pain is unbearable. We tried to help, but we couldn't. It was especially hard with the children. When it came time for the parents of the deceased to testify, many couldn't hold back their tears. The father of the 7-year-old boy recounted, "He was so lively, cheerful, loved drawing, playing soccer. And then in one day, it all ended. I watched him die."
It's impossible to forget. The mother of the murdered girl held out until the end, but finally broke. "Why?" she screamed, addressing Tamara. "Why did you kill my daughter? What did she ever do to you? She was only 9 years old." And Ivanyutina looked at her indifferently. That indifference was more terrifying than any malice. The trial lasted a week. In that time, 50 witnesses were questioned, hundreds of documents reviewed, all physical evidence examined. There was no doubt about the defendant's guilt. All that remained was to determine the punishment. On June 30th, the closing arguments began. The prosecutor demanded the supreme measure of punishment for all 4 defendants. These people, he said, committed monstrous crimes. They killed coldly, methodically, without pity. They show no remorse. They are dangerous to society. The only just punishment is the death penalty. The defense attorneys tried to mitigate the sentence. Anton Petrovich's lawyer cited his advanced age. Maria Ivanovna's invoked her poor health. Nina's asked the court to consider that she acted under the influence of her parents and older sister. Only Tamara's lawyer had nothing to say. His client refused to repent and behaved provocatively. On July 2nd, the verdict was announced. The hall was packed. People stood in the aisles, sat on the windowsills. Everyone awaited the decision. The judge read out the ruling. Anton Petrovich Maslenko was found guilty on all counts. Sentence: 13 years imprisonment with confiscation of property. Maria Ivanovna Maslenko, 10 years. Nina Matsibora, 15 years. When the judge reached Tamara Ivanyutina, an absolute silence fell over the hall. Guilty on all counts. Sentence: extraordinary measure of punishment. Execution by firing squad, with confiscation of property. The hall exploded in applause. The victims' relatives wept with relief. Some shouted, "Justice has triumphed." Tamara heard the verdict calmly. She didn't even blink, just asked the guard, "And when?" Many in the hall considered the sentence not harsh enough. People yelled that all 4 deserved death. They were especially outraged that Anton and Maria Maslenko weren't sentenced to execution. They taught their daughters everything. They're the main culprits, voices cried from the seats. But the law was the law. In the Soviet Union, the death penalty wasn't applied to those over 70. The Maslenkos formally fell into that category, though many lawyers believe there should be no exceptions for such crimes. Ivanyutina was given the floor for her final statement. Everyone waited for her to ask for forgiveness, to show at least a drop of remorse. But Tamara said something entirely different. "I do not admit guilt," she began. "Everything I did was necessary. People got in my way and I removed them. That's normal. I won't ask for forgiveness. That's not how I was raised." The hall buzzed. "I regret only one thing," Ivanyutina continued. "I wanted to buy a black Volga with chrome. That was my dream, but I didn't make it in time." After those words, chaos erupted in the hall, such that the judge had to call in extra police. People tried to break through to the defendant, shouted, cried, demanded immediate execution. The victims' relatives sobbed in outrage. How can someone be so heartless? How can she regret not the lives she ruined, but the unfulfilled dream of a car?
The sentence came into effect. Tamara was transferred to Kyiv's Lukyanivska prison, into the death row cell. Her parents and sister were sent to strict regime colonies. Anton Petrovich and Maria Ivanovna spent their final days in captivity. Both were ill, worn out by the investigation and trial. They died in prison within a year, never living to see release. Nina Matsubora served her full term. She was freed in 2002 at age 53. The woman vanished, changed her name, and got lost somewhere in the vast expanse of the former USSR.
Her subsequent fate remains unknown, and Tamara Ivanyutina waited for her execution for 3 years and 4 months, the time in the death row cell. Cell number 17 in Lukyanivska prison was reserved for those sentenced to death. Here, those whose lives were counted in days awaited the carrying out of their sentence. The cell was in an isolated block where sounds from the rest of the prison barely penetrated. The window was small, high up near the ceiling. A bunk, a table, a bucket. Nothing more. Tamara was placed there on July 8, 1987. She was the only woman among the death row inmates at the time. She was kept separate from the men, taken for solitary walks, fed in her cell. The guards expected Ivanyutina to break. Condemned prisoners typically went through stages: shock, denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. Some prayed around the clock. Others banged their heads against the wall. Still others wrote endless appeals to the authorities. But Tamara behaved differently. She settled into the cell like it was home, requested books, detective novels and romances, to be passed in. She read several a week. During walks, she did exercises. She ate with appetite, slept soundly, without dreams. The guards were baffled. This woman acted as if she were vacationing at a sanatorium, not awaiting death. Ivanyutina quickly built rapport with the staff. She was polite, smiling, chatty. She asked the female guards about their families, children, problems, and gave practical, sensible advice. The women couldn't help but warm to her, only to recall it later with horror. How could one sympathize with a child killer? But Tamara knew how to win people over. It was her talent. She instinctively sensed what someone needed, what words to say, how to act. One guard complained about her drunken husband. Tamara advised slipping something into his vodka to kill his taste for alcohol. Another guard suffered from a rude neighbor, and Ivanyutina suggested treating her to something tasty, inviting her over. The advice sounded innocent, but those who knew Tamara's story understood the subtext. Even in death row, she was trying to nudge people toward murder. It was beyond her control. Ivanyutina couldn't live any other way. Her husband Oleg visited every month. He brought packages, candies, cookies, magazines. Tamara accepted everything gratefully, asked about the children, the apartment, the money. There was no remorse in her. She behaved as if she were on a temporary business trip. During visits, Ivanyutina discussed financial matters with her husband. "Don't sell the apartment," she said. "Prices will rise even more. Withdraw the money from the spare casa. Inflation will eat it up. Help the children get good jobs." Oleg nodded. He had always been under his wife's thumb, and even now couldn't contradict her. Tamara filed a cassation appeal, then a supervisory complaint. She didn't hope for clemency, but wanted to delay the execution of the sentence. The complaints were reviewed for months. Ivanyutina gained extra weeks, months of life. In her cell, she kept a diary. The entries were partially preserved. After the execution, psychologists studied them, trying to understand the personality of the serial killer. The diary turned out to be a strange document. Tamara wrote about everyday things. Today for lunch there was porridge, tasteless, watery. Need to ask Oleg to send some sugar. Read a new detective novel. Interesting, especially the ending. Saw a crow during the walk. Big, black, staring at me.
Not a word about the victims. Not a word of remorse. Not a word about fear of death. Just mundane notes, like in the diary of an ordinary woman. The psychologist diagnosed a complete lack of empathy and monstrous emotional coldness. But other entries slipped through sometimes. Today I thought about the Volga. Black, shiny, with white seats inside.
I'd drive it to the center, and everyone would look. Everyone would envy. This dream didn't let go, even in death row. If they gave me one more chance, Tamara wrote, I'd do everything differently, more cautiously. Wouldn't poison so many at once, but one by one, quietly. And I'd save up more money. Buy the Volga. She didn't regret the crimes. She regretted getting caught. That was the key difference between Ivanyutina and other criminals. She saw no moral dimension to her actions. For her, murder was just a tool, a means to an end, an effective one that she had used incorrectly, too conspicuously, too riskily. In the cell, Tamara even tried to befriend the prison administration. She wrote notes to the warden, complained about the conditions, requested meetings. At one meeting, she tried to offer a bribe, hinting that the family had hidden money and was ready to pay for an escape. Of course, it didn't work. Ivanyutina didn't realize that in the mid-1980s, amid perestroika and glasnost, her case was too high profile. They watched her closely. Newspapers wrote about her. Her name was known across the entire Soviet Union. No one would risk helping such a criminal. But Tamara kept trying. She genuinely believed that everything could be bought. Everyone could be bribed or deceived. That belief was the foundation of her worldview. For her, people fell into two categories: those who could be used and those who got in the way. There was no third. Time passed. The cassation was denied. The supervisory complaint denied. The clemency petition denied. Only one step remained: carrying out the sentence. But even here there were delays. The country was entering perestroika. Laws were changing. Discussions about the humanity of the death penalty were emerging. In 1988, Tamara hoped her sentence would be commuted to life imprisonment. There were talks of a moratorium on capital punishment, of reforming the criminal code.
Ivanyutina followed the news, discussed it with the guards, made plans. But the moratorium never happened. The laws didn't change. The sentence remained in force. And in 1989, it became clear that the execution was inevitable. Tamara turned 48. She had aged in the cell. Gray hairs appeared, wrinkles, weariness in her eyes. But her character hadn't changed. Ivanyutina remained the same cold, calculating woman, devoid of regrets. In her final year of life, she thought a lot about the past. Not about the victims, but about her own life. Her childhood in poverty, the communal apartment, the endless chase for money. How she wanted to live beautifully, richly, no worse than others. And how the Volga remained a dream. If I'd had money, she wrote in her diary, I'd have been happy. I wouldn't have quarreled with anyone, wouldn't have bothered anyone. I'd just have lived and enjoyed it. But there was no money, and I did what needed to be done. That was her truth. A terrible, twisted, monstrous truth. Tamara genuinely believed she had killed out of necessity, that she had no choice, that the circumstances were to blame, not her. On December 5th, 1990, the prison warden entered her cell. His face was official, stern. Ivanyutina, he said, the sentence will be carried out tomorrow. Tamara nodded. Understood. She didn't sleep that last night, sat on her bunk staring at the wall. What was this woman thinking in her final hours of life? Did she recall her victims, the children she had poisoned? Did she feel even a hint of remorse on the threshold of death? The guard on duty that night recounted that Tamara asked for paper and pencil.
wrote a short note, and handed it over with the words, "Give this to my husband." The note had just 2 lines. Oleg, sorry it didn't work out. Take the money from the bank. You'll need it. Not a word of remorse. Not a word about the children she was leaving behind. Just a practical instruction about the money.
To the very end, Ivanyutina stayed true to herself.
Dawn broke in Kiev at 7:40 a.m. The sky was gray, a fine drizzle falling. A cold, damp, joyless December morning. The kind of morning when you want to stay home, wrap yourself in a blanket, drink hot tea. But in cell number 17 of Lukyanivska prison, no one was drinking tea. Tamara Ivanyutina sat on her bunk, dressed and shod. She knew they would come soon. She knew she had less than an hour to live. And waited. At 7:50, 3 men in uniform entered the cell. The prison warden, the prosecutor, and the escort. The warden read the decree on carrying out the sentence. Official words, strict formulations, seal, and signature. Tamara listened indifferently. When the reading ended, she asked, "Can I smoke?" They gave her a cigarette. Tamara smoked slowly, inhaling deeply, watching the thin stream of smoke rising to the ceiling. "I haven't smoked in a long time," she said. No one replied. After finishing the cigarette, Ivanyutina stood up. "Well, shall we go?" Her voice was calm, without a tremor. The escort took her by the arm. They left the cell and walked down the long corridor. Their footsteps echoed in the silence. Somewhere far off, a dog barked. The execution room was in the basement. They descended the stairs, 23 steps. Tamara counted them, probably to distract herself. At the bottom was a metal door. The escort opened it with a key. The room was small, square, the walls painted gray. Against the far wall stood a wooden panel with darkened stains. The floor was concrete with a groove for draining blood. It smelled of dampness and something else. Fear, death, despair. A smell impossible to describe but felt by everyone who entered. They led Tamara to the panel and suggested she kneel, but she refused. "I'll stand." The escort didn't insist. Ivanyutina turned her back to the wall. They didn't tie her up. She stood motionless, staring straight ahead. The executioner entered the room. He was in uniform.
His face hidden by a mask. In his hands, a PM pistol. Standard weapon for carrying out death sentences in the USSR. The prosecutor read the sentence once more. A formality. A legal requirement. Tamara didn't listen. She looked at the small window near the ceiling. A patch of gray sky was visible. It was raining. Droplets slid down the glass. "Last words?" the prosecutor asked. Tamara paused, then said, "Tell the children I loved them." A pause. "And also say that the Volga remained a dream." Those were her final words. Strange, absurd, mismatched to the moment. A woman who had killed 9 people, including children, thought in her last seconds about an unfulfilled dream of a car. The prosecutor nodded to the executioner. He raised the pistol, aimed at the back of the head. Standard practice. Death comes instantly. Tamara closed her eyes. Her lips moved. Perhaps a prayer. Perhaps final thoughts. The shot rang out at 8:06 a.m. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space. The echo bounced off the walls, lingering long. Ivanyutina's body slumped, fell to the floor. Blood flowed along the groove to the drain. The doctor approached, checked the pulse, recorded the time of death. 8:06 a.m., December 6, 1990. Tamara Antonovna Ivanyutina, 49 years old, convicted of mass murders, executed in accordance with the court sentence. The body was covered with tarpaulin and carried out of the execution room. Per regulations, relatives weren't notified of the exact execution date. They were informed after the fact. Oleg Ivanyutin was told 3 days later.
They said the body wouldn't be released. The executed were buried on prison grounds in an unmarked grave. The husband didn't insist. He took the news calmly, even with relief. Tamara was dead. The nightmare was over. Life could begin anew, an attempt to forget those terrible years. But forgetting was impossible. The story of Tamara Ivanyutina became part of Soviet criminal chronicles.
Newspapers wrote about her, documentaries were filmed, books were written. Her name became synonymous with infamy. The Kyiv poisoner, the last woman executed in the USSR. That same day, December 6th, in Moscow, the Supreme Soviet was debating a draft law on a moratorium on the death penalty. Deputies argued about the humanity of this punishment, the need for reforms, civilized values. They didn't know that in a Kyiv prison, the last woman in the history of the Soviet Union had just been executed. A year later, the moratorium would be introduced, capital punishment ceasing de facto, though de jure it remained in the criminal code until the end of the USSR. Tamara Ivanyutina fell into the final wave of executions. A few more months and her sentence would have been automatically commuted to life imprisonment. But history doesn't deal in the conditional mood. What happened, happened. Tamara Ivanyutina died from a bullet to the back of the head at the age of 49. She became the third and last woman executed in the USSR after 1960. Before her, 2 women had been executed. Antonina Makarova in 1979 for participating in the mass executions of peaceful civilians and partisans during the Great Patriotic War. She served in the German police, personally shooting Soviet citizens with a machine gun. Over 1,500 lives were on her account. Berta Borodkina in 1987 for systematic embezzlement of socialist property on an especially large scale. She headed a trust of restaurants and canteens in Gelendzhik, stealing millions of rubles. She is the only woman in Russian history executed solely for economic crimes. And Tamara Ivanyutina in 1990 for serial murders with particular cruelty, the last in this mournful list. Her grave is on the grounds of Lukyanivska prison. The exact location is unknown. The cemetery for the executed has no headstones or plaques, just a plot of land behind a high fence, where those whom the state sentenced to the supreme measure rest. Relatives of the victims sometimes come there, stand at the gates, gaze at the enclosed territory. Some pray, others just stand in silence. They know that somewhere beneath the soil lies the woman who destroyed their loved ones. And they feel strange emotions. Relief that she's gone, and emptiness from the fact that revenge brought no solace. Epilogue. The Thallium Trail. The story of Tamara Ivanyutina didn't end with her death. It continued in the fates of those who remained alive, the surviving victims, relatives of the deceased, investigators, judges. All of them bore the imprint of an encounter with absolute evil. The 9 children and adults who survived the March 11 poisoning were left disabled. All developed severe neurological disorders, polyneuropathies, coordination impairments, chronic pain. Thallium had destroyed their nervous systems forever. Some walked with canes. Others struggled to hold a spoon. Some suffered constant headaches. The children who survived the poisoning carried psychological trauma for life. They feared eating in public places, distrusted adults, were tormented by nightmares. Some required ongoing psychotherapy. Their childhoods were stolen, their lives crippled. The parents of the 4 deceased couldn't recover from the tragedy. The mother of the murdered 9-year-old girl took her own life 3 years after Ivanyutina's execution. She left a note. "I can't go on anymore. Every day I see her face. Forgive me, my little girl." The father of the 7-year-old boy turned to alcohol. He lost his job, his family, his home. He died in poverty in 2003. In his final days, he told everyone who would listen about his son, how smart, kind, and talented he was, and how a monster in the guise of a dishwasher had stolen his life. The parents of the other deceased tried to move on. Some succeeded, some didn't. A few founded a public organization to help victims of violent crimes. They conducted awareness campaigns, supported other families facing grief. This gave their existence meaning, helped them cope with the pain. The investigator who cracked the Ivanyutina case received an award and a promotion, but it didn't make him happy. He had seen too much horror.
peered too deeply into the abyss of human cruelty. 5 years later, he retired, moved to the countryside, tried to forget. It didn't work. The judge who handed down the sentence remembered the trial until the end of his life. He had presided over hundreds of cases, but Ivanyutina's stood out. "I've seen many criminals," he said in an interview, "but I've never encountered such indifference to others' suffering. She wasn't human. She was a killing machine." The psychologists who studied Ivanyutina's personality wrote several papers on psychopathy and moral depravity. They tried to understand how such a criminal type forms, the roles of upbringing, environment, genetics. They found no answers. Each case is unique. There is no universal formula for evil. The Maslenko-Ivanyutina family case became a subject of study in MVD academies. Cadets were taught about it as a classic example of a family-organized criminal group, how serial killers can go unnoticed for years, the importance of vigilance, the need to check even the most improbable leads. In the 1990s, as the Soviet Union collapsed and the chaos of the transitional period began, rumors emerged. People said Ivanyutina wasn't executed, but secretly relocated and used by special services for dirty operations. They claimed to have seen her in Chechnya, Transnistria, other hotspots. Conspiracy theorists spun tales of secret poisoner squads. It was all nonsense. Execution documents survived. Witnesses are alive. The grave is known. Tamara Ivanyutina died on December 6th, 1990. But people have a way of turning real criminals into myths. It happened with Jack the Ripper, with Chikatilo. And so it was with the Kyiv poisoner. School number
106 in Kyiv continued operating. The cafeteria was closed for 6 months, fully disinfected, all equipment replaced. Parents were afraid to send their children there. The fear of poisoning lingered deep. The director had to put in tremendous effort to restore trust. The communal apartment on Podilska Street, where the Maslenkos lived, was eventually dispersed. The neighbors didn't want to live anymore in a place where murders had been plotted. The apartment was divided, separate entrances made. The new tenants didn't know the history of the site. Maybe that was for the best. Tamara's husband, Oleg Ivanyutin, changed his surname and vanished. His children took different names too, and moved to other cities. They tried to start life with a clean slate, to forget the nightmare their mother had created. Whether they succeeded is unknown. Some things can't be forgotten. Nina Matsibora, Tamara's younger sister, was released in 2002. She was 53 years old. 15 years in the colony had changed her. The woman became gray, unassuming, quiet. She got new documents, moved to a small town in western Ukraine, worked as a cleaner, lived alone, and didn't associate with anyone. She died of cancer in 2010, buried in an unmarked grave. Anton Petrovich and Maria Ivanovna Maslenko, the father and mother of the poisoner family, died in the colony. Anton Petrovich in 1988 from a heart attack, Maria Ivanovna in 1989 from a stroke. They were buried on the prison cemetery, without honors or prayers. Their graves overgrew with grass and were forgotten. The story of Tamara Ivanyutina reminds us that evil isn't always obvious. It can hide behind a smile, behind politeness, behind the mask of a respectable person. The most terrible criminals often look like ordinary people. Neighbors, colleagues, acquaintances, the ones we meet every day. It also reminds us of the importance of upbringing. Anton and Maria Maslenko instilled monstrous values in their children. They taught them that money is more important than life, that the end justifies the means, that the weak can be destroyed. And the children absorbed these lessons. The upbringing of killers, the result was inevitable. But the main lesson of this story is different. It's that each of us bears responsibility for our actions. Tamara Ivanyutina could have chosen another path. She could have worked honestly, earned honestly, lived by the law. Yes, it would have been harder. Yes, she wouldn't have bought the Volga. But she would have remained human. Instead, she chose the path of murder. And that path led her to the concrete wall of the execution room.
to a bullet in the back of the head, to an unmarked grave, to a place where no one would come, bring flowers, or remember her with a kind word. The last woman executed in the Soviet Union, a serial killer who poisoned 9 people and attempted the lives of 20 more. A monster who dreamed of a black Volga. That's how she entered history. That's how she's remembered. December 6, 1990 became the final date in the history of applying the death penalty to women in our country. After that, the state never again sentenced a woman to execution. Times changed, laws became milder, society more humane. But the memory of Tamara Ivanyutina's victims lives on. In Kyiv, on one of the cemeteries, stands a small monument to the 4 victims who died on March 11, 1987. 2 teachers and 2 children, a 7-year-old boy and a 9-year-old girl. Their names are carved into the granite beneath the inscription, "Victims of Human Cruelty." Relatives come here every year on the anniversary of the tragedy, bring flowers, light candles, and stand in silence. They remember. And that's right. We must not forget, because those who forget history are doomed to repeat it.
And somewhere behind the high fence of Lukyanivska prison, in the ground, lies a woman who never repented, who until her last breath regretted not the lives she ruined, but the unfulfilled dream of a car. A woman who turned human life into bargaining chips. Her name became a symbol of the abyss a person can fall into when they lose their humanity, of the cynicism a soul can reach when not a drop of compassion remains. The story is over. The last page has been turned, the final shot has been fired. But memory endures. And the question that will haunt researchers for a long time: how did an ordinary Soviet woman become a serial killer? Somewhere there is a line, once crossed, after which a person ceases to be human. There is no answer. There are only facts. Cold, terrifying, irrefutable. And warnings for future generations. Evil is real. It exists. It can be right beside you. And the only protection against it is not to forget humanity. The value of every life. That no Volga, no money, no material goods are worth a human life. Tamara Antonovna Ivanyutina, 1941 to 1990. The Kyiv poisoner. The last woman executed in the USSR.